Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to a video that I actually wasn't anticipating on making this soon and actually just being able to make in general, but certain circumstances lined up to both make it possible and also kind of make it a necessity. So this video is going to cover my first impressions of the brand new base model M1 Mac Mini. And for those of you with a short attention span, I can sum this video up in 4 words. What the actual So to start out, I was actually able to buy this base model Mac Mini because it was on open box at a local store of mine. So I was actually able to buy it for $90 less than what Apple has it listed for right now, which for me is a steal. I think that's really awesome. And from the performance figures I was seeing on other YouTube channels, I figured it'd be worth the investment to just see how it performs. If it didn't perform the way I was hoping, I could always return it or transition it over to being something like a media server where I can finally retire my 10-year-old Xserve. Yeah, I use an Xserve for my media server, don't judge me. And it also became a necessity for one very big pain in the ass reason. This is an Intel Core i9 Retina MacBook Pro with 32 gigabytes of RAM and a terabyte of storage. This is an RMA box from Apple, because I have to send it back for the fifth time because the keyboard keeps failing in this thing because it's the butterfly switch one, and I hate these keys with a burning passion. I did an entire video talking about this MacBook, and you can check it out over there, but this MacBook has performance-wise been good. I would even go as far to say admirable. But it has literally been a hindrance to me generally every 3 to 6 months because the keyboard keeps failing. I don't know if I got a lemon, I don't know what the problem is with this, but it's been constantly failing in the keyboard department. And I can't really afford to have my main machine for editing both photos and videos going down every 6 months, even when it spends 99% of its life in a 12 South ARC stand set up with a desktop mode running 2 screens, external keyboard, and a couple Thunderbolt accessories. I can't constantly keep having this fail and taking my entire production down. Yes, I have a gaming PC, and yes, I could learn Adobe Premiere, but I hate Windows. I literally just had to reinstall Windows after a recent update because the drivers decided to just magically disappear. And Premiere to me just doesn't make sense. It's a professional tool in the sense that I guess professionals like suffering because certain tools just don't make sense to the average user, but I digress. I could do that, but instead, I decided to get a Mac Mini and see if potentially the performance figures that I was seeing online were actually up to snuff. But before I get into performance, I'm going to talk about how this was to set up and the port selection because it was easy. Because my previous setup was basically consolidated down to 2 Thunderbolt ports on either side of my MacBook, I was able to, well, consolidate everything down to 2 Thunderbolt ports on the back of the Mac Mini, which coincidentally happens to be all it has. Now that is unfortunate because I did like the option to have 4 of them on the back of the Intel Mac Mini, but honestly, I really didn't notice any difference, and it also allowed me to get the giant eGPU that I keep on my desk off of it so that I have more space to put other accessories. Now, this doesn't support the eGPU at the moment. It does recognize it, which is weird, but it doesn't actually do any acceleration. I don't think it has drivers for it, so it's kind of weird that it does that, but maybe they'll add it later. I don't know. Maybe they'll add support for it later. They broke support for it with compressor, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. On top of that, you have 1 gigabit Ethernet port, which for industry, sure, it's kind of a bummer you can't do 10 gigabit, but for me, as a general user, it's nice to have for just backing things up to my network drive, and the fastest connection I'm going to have here is 1 gigabit anyway, so who cares? A dedicated HDMI. This was actually really nice because I usually ran one HDMI port out of my eGPU, so having an option to just plug it right in here is always nice. 2 USB ports, which in all honesty I haven't even used yet, and a headphone jack that I know I'm never going to use. But it's nice to have, I suppose. So setup was a breeze, and putting my apps on it was also stupid easy thanks to iCloud and Time Machine and all the other things that just make transferring from one Mac to another that little bit simpler. So with all that done, how has the actual performance been on this machine? Well, even though this is a first impressions video, I am going to give a few solid numbers, but that'll be a little later. To start out with, just general use, web browsing, all that kind of stuff. was insanely fast. Boot up time was insane. Like, this was way faster than any Mac I have ever owned, and I've done a lot with a lot of Macs, so that was really cool. On top of that, just opening applications, even Final Cut, which is a very demanding application, opened in no time. Just in case you guys don't believe me in terms of how quickly these programs open, let me open Final Cut. I'll show you. I'm opening it, and we're ready. Like, the timeline's working, all my stuff's here. I've never had any Mac open Final Cut this fast, like, ever. Not my MacBook Pro, not an old Mac Pro, not my modified Macs, none of them. Not even my Hackintosh would open up Final Cut this quickly. This is genuinely fast and genuinely impressive. Even I look kind of shocked on the screen. So with that being said, what am I losing by switching to a desktop like this, and what am I losing by switching to M1? Well, I'm losing portability, which I thought initially would be a bit of a pain in the butt, because it was nice to be able to kind of take my laptop with me. Then I kind of thought to myself, when was the last time I actually did that? Because even my recording setup, what you're hearing me record with right now, isn't done through any Mac. I have been using, you can see the cord, I have been using an iPad Pro with the mouse and keyboard trackpad setup since, I don't know, probably September, and I haven't noticed anything different compared to what I was getting on my MacBook. And I'm willing to bet you didn't either. So sure, portability is gone, but I can browse the web and record audio and even do most of my photo editing right off my iPad. So it's not really much of a loss. I mean, a loss is a loss. I still can't do it with a desktop, but I have alternatives that I've actually been using before the Mac Mini was even in my possession. Upgradeable memory. Yeah, that does kind of suck, though I never had that with my MacBook anyway, and when I was looking into getting the Intel Mac Mini, I really don't care to crack open a Mac Mini, so wouldn't have mattered anyway. 8 gigabytes of memory versus 32. This is actually a notable exception to everything else having an alternative or not mattering to me. This does kind of matter. So while I can't upgrade it, I am probably going to be getting a 16 gigabyte model solely for the sake of having that 16 gigs of memory for video editing, because while the performance hasn't been impacted nearly as much as I thought it would be, it is still somewhat noticeable with heavier tasks. It does tend to dump a lot of memory to the hard drive using swap, where you can actually see it in Activity Monitor. It's kind of neat. It's cool that they're able to do it that quickly, but still not ideal. And I think with the 16 gigabyte model, that will definitely alleviate a lot of those issues. Hopefully, we shall see. And storage. Well, yeah, there's no getting around that. I'm a video editor, and there's just no way of actually making a usable system out of a 256 gigabyte machine. I don't really like relying on external drives for everything. I like mostly moving projects onto the Mac, doing my edits, and then exporting them out to an external drive for storage. And considering one project file for me would normally fill up the remaining storage I have after I put all the apps on it, yeah, that's not ideal. But really, those are the only things I'm losing, and 2 of the 4 things I can completely live without, so 50-50 on loss isn't too bad. As for gain, well, silence is one thing. I can't tell you how many times I've had to sit and sort of work with the noise canceling and noise reduction in Final Cut to try to get rid of the fan noise of my MacBook just going ham while I'm recording. And I literally have hard drives on the other side of my desk that are louder than this thing, sitting and rendering entire projects 6 inches away from me. That's insane. And performance. So yeah, 2 things I'm gaining, but really those 2 things, especially performance, sort of cover all the bases I need for gain. But let's talk about performance now that y'all have waited long enough. Apple wasn't joking. That was the first thing I took away from this. Apple was not joking. I have a few apps that are Intel based that have to run on Rosetta. Oddly enough, one of them is Logic. Yes, they did update Logic to run on Apple Silicon, but I have a few plugins that are literally incompatible with anything but an Intel system, and so I have to run the older version of Logic in Rosetta, and it feels no different. In fact, it feels snappier. I did a cover recently of Blinding Lights, and most of those audio tracks, except for my vocals, are completely synthesized. There is no like analog recording or anything apart from my voice. And my MacBook Pro generally would hit between 50 to 80% CPU usage depending on which tracks we're playing. And it would sound like a jet engine. This Mac Mini, on the other hand, plays it through using between 20 to 30% of its CPU and is dead silent, which means I can literally record standing in front of the Mac Mini as opposed to having to use the length of my mic cord to get a distance away. I'm actually going to be able to work closer to my desk, which is just insane. So my audio recording stuff is awesome, and I love it, and it performs no differently than I was expecting. In fact, better than my MacBook Pro. But now we get on to the big stuff: video editing and rendering. Now, like I said earlier, I hate Adobe Premiere. I don't put it on any of my Apple products. I put it on Windows because if I have to do something in Creative Cloud, I would rather just throw power at the problem and let Windows unstably, hopefully not crash its way through a render, than try to put it on my Mac and hope that it kind of works because Adobe doesn't want to optimize for shit. So these figures are going to be for Final Cut users only, and I actually kind of discovered something pretty interesting with the render side of things. So on the render side of things, I know I'm going backwards, I'll talk about editing in a minute, but the render side of things was kind of interesting. So I exported my most recent video. It was a review of My Hero Academia Heroes Rising. You can check it out over there. I exported that 17-minute 4K video with color correction, audio, and overlays in 17 minutes flat through compressor on the Mac Mini. That's impressive, especially considering it doesn't have a discrete GPU. It's running off of Apple's first silicon chip. This is going to be the worst of the lineup, and it's already doing better than a lot of machines, and I'll talk about how I did on my MacBook Pro in a minute. But that's impressive. With 8 gigabytes of memory, no less. That's really cool. But when I exported that same project on the MacBook Pro, it cranked it out in about 14 minutes and 30 seconds, so it was about 3 minutes less time than the Mac Mini. Now, that's cool and all, but the Mac Mini without a discrete GPU cranked it out only 3 minutes longer than an i9 with a dedicated GPU and 32 gigabytes of RAM, so that's a pretty close margin. But then when I ran another test, I took a look and realized that compressor was barely utilizing the CPU and only about half utilizing the GPU on the Mac Mini. And when I opened up the same activity monitor doing the same project on my MacBook Pro, it was maxing out the GPU, but barely even using the CPU. So I figured I'd try the render test again in Final Cut. And I'm going to be using Final Cut for all my renders from here on out. This actually has nothing to do with the Mac Mini or the MacBook Pro or whether I'm sticking with Intel or not. I don't know what compressor is supposed to do, because when I threw the same project, the same 17-minute project, into Final Cut and let my Mac Mini have at it with the Final Cut render engine, it cranked it out in 13 minutes and 12 seconds. I threw my MacBook Pro at it, i9, discrete GPU, the whole 9 yards, and it cranked it out in the same 14 minutes and 30 seconds, which means that my Mac Mini was just shy of a minute faster than an i9 MacBook Pro running the same project through Final Cut. Okay, sure, that makes total sense. And keep in mind, while I'm running these tests, the MacBook Pro sounds like a jet about to take off from my desk, whereas if the Mac Mini didn't have that little light on the front, you wouldn't even think it was turned on. It is that silent. That's insane to me. I'm kind of fanboying here just because I've wanted something that I can put on my desk that is dead silent for years, that can render quickly, don't have to think much about it. I can hit render, walk away, let it do its thing, or even continue doing other tasks and not have to just keep headphones in all the time while it's rendering so I don't have to hear the obnoxious fan whirring sound. And this Mac Mini does that. Not only does it do it, but I actually just put my hand on the bottom of the MacBook Pro and put my hand on the top of the Mac Mini. The MacBook Pro was uncomfortable to touch, and the Mac Mini was maybe 2 degrees warmer than ambient. That's insane. Now, for fear of rambling, I'm going to conclude now, and I'm going to conclude with this. When I get my MacBook Pro back from its 4th keyboard repair and its 5th repair in total, I will be taking it to my nearest Apple store and trading it in so that I can order another one of these with 16 gigabytes of memory and a 1 terabyte solid-state storage drive, because this Mac Mini has proven itself to me. Not even the Mac Mini as a platform, but the M1 chip has completely proven itself to me that if you use the right tools, it will outperform an i9 MacBook Pro, the same computer I have been editing all of these videos on for the past 2 years. And not only that, this is the crazy part. using tools that weren't optimized for this through an emulation layer called Rosetta 2, it still runs faster. That is nuts. So I'm not here to sell you on a Mac Mini. I'm not here to sell you on the M1 chip or Apple in general. But I will say that considering this is Apple's first go at their own silicon in a computer, they're off to the right start. And they are definitely going to be changing, whether it be their computer industry or the computer industry as a whole or whatever the case may be. They're changing something. They're changing it big. And I'm extremely excited for the future of this series. Either way, those have been my first impressions. Genuinely impressed with this thing. Holy crap. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I wasn't actually anticipating on making it this soon or kind of at all because I didn't think I'd be able to afford one of these because of the spec I was looking for, but things work out in funny ways. So either way, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe. Check out some of the other videos like I mentioned in the little cards over there, and that's it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.